What if the greatest leadership lessons of all time were hiding in plain sight, not in dusty textbooks or corporate seminars, but woven into the very myths we've been telling for thousands of years? Picture this: beneath the surface of every heroic legend, every epic battle, and every godly intervention, there's a secret playbook for strategy, resilience, and influence. These stories weren't just entertainment for ancient audiences. They were survival manuals passed down through generations to teach kings how to rule, warriors how to fight, and thinkers how to outmaneuver their rivals. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 22 of these legendary tales to reveal the covert wisdom they've been carrying all along. Think about Odysseus, the master tactician who turned the tide of war not with brute strength but with cunning and patience. Or Hercules, whose labors weren't just feats of power, they were lessons in perseverance, showing how even the mightiest heroes face seemingly impossible challenges. These myths weren't accidents. They were carefully crafted to embed timeless principles into the collective imagination, ensuring that the secrets of leadership would never be forgotten. And here's the startling truth: those same principles still work today. Whether you're navigating a competitive career, building a team, or simply trying to outthink your obstacles, these ancient stories hold the keys to modern success. This isn't just about revisiting old tales. It's about unlocking a hidden language of strategy that's been waiting for you to notice it. By the time we're done, you'll never look at mythology the same way again. You'll start to see the patterns, how a single decision in a story mirrors the choices leaders face now, how a hero's flaw holds a warning for anyone in power, and how these ancient narratives still whisper advice to those willing to listen. So let's step into the world of gods and monsters, not as spectators but as students, because the most powerful lessons aren't always found in the future. Sometimes they're buried in the past, disguised as legends, ready to guide you forward. Odysseus didn't win the Trojan War with swords or speeches. He won it with silence. Imagine 10 long years of bloodshed, 2 armies locked in a stalemate, and a city that seemed utterly unconquerable. That's when Odysseus made his move, not with a battle cry but with a wooden horse. It wasn't just a clever trick. It was the culmination of years of observation, adaptation, and most importantly, patience. While others rushed into fights or demanded quick victories, Odysseus understood something far more powerful: the art of strategic waiting. This wasn't impulsiveness disguised as bravery, it was discipline. Modern leaders often mistake speed for effectiveness, rushing decisions to show momentum. But Odysseus teaches us that true strategy lies in knowing when not to act. Think of it like chess. The best players don't just react to their opponent's moves. They plan several steps ahead, sacrificing short-term gains for long-term victory. Sun Tzu called it winning without fighting. Odysseus called it survival. The brilliance of the Trojan horse wasn't just its deception, it was its timing. Odysseus waited until the Trojans were at their most vulnerable, celebrating what they thought was their enemy's retreat. He didn't just exploit their overconfidence, he let them convince themselves the war was over. That's the power of patience. It lets your opponents make the mistakes for you. Today, this plays out in business negotiations, political campaigns, even personal conflicts. Rushing in might give you a temporary advantage, but waiting for the right moment, that's how you change the game entirely. And here's the twist: Odysseus' greatest test of patience wasn't outside the walls of Troy. It was on his journey home, where storms, monsters, and temptations constantly tried to derail him. Each time, he had to choose between shortcuts that promised immediate relief and the harder, slower path that actually led to victory. Sound familiar? Modern leadership is littered with distractions, quick fixes, trends, pressure to deliver overnight results. But the myth whispers a warning: the faster you chase solutions, the more likely you are to lose your way. So what's the takeaway for today's leaders? Strategy isn't just about what you do, it's about when you do it. Whether you're launching a product, navigating a crisis, or trying to outmaneuver competition, remember Odysseus. The best opportunities aren't seized in haste. They're earned by those who know how to wait, watch, and strike when the moment is truly right. After all, the Trojans didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because they forgot to ask one critical question: why would the Greeks give up now? And that's the difference between reacting and truly leading. Hercules didn't become a legend by accident. He earned it through 12 impossible tasks that would have broken anyone else. But here's the secret buried in his labors: they weren't just tests of strength. They were a masterclass in resilience, each one designed to teach a different facet of leadership under pressure. Take the Hydra, for example. Every time Hercules cut off one of its heads, 2 more grew back. Sound familiar? Leaders today face the same kind of multiplying chaos problems that seem to regenerate faster than they can be solved. But Hercules didn't just keep swinging his sword. He adapted. He used fire to seal the wounds, turning a reactive struggle into a strategic victory. That's the first lesson. True strength isn't about brute force. It's about finding smarter ways to stop chaos at its source. Then there's the Orjon stables, a task so disgusting it seemed designed to humiliate him. 30 years of filth piled high, with a king betting Hercules couldn't clean it in a day. But instead of shoveling endlessly, he rerouted 2 rivers through the stables, washing away the corruption in hours. This wasn't just a clever trick, it was a lesson in systemic thinking. Leaders often get stuck trying to fix symptoms instead of root causes. Hercules shows us that the real power lies in changing the conditions that allow problems to fester. Whether it's a toxic workplace, a broken process, or a stagnant industry, sometimes you don't need to fight the mess. You need to change the flow. Psychologists call this the hero's journey, a cycle of struggle, adaptation, and growth that's echoed in myths across cultures. But Hercules' story adds a crucial twist. Progress isn't linear. After his 6th labor, he could have celebrated being halfway done. But the next 6 tasks were even harder, pushing him beyond physical limits into moral and emotional trials. The Golden Hind taught patience, the Erymanthian boar demanded focus, and the apples of the Hesperides forced him to confront his own ego. Modern leaders face the same nonlinear path. Success isn't a straight line, it's a series of plateaus and cliffs, each requiring a new skill or perspective. And let's not forget the most overlooked lesson of all: Hercules didn't work alone. For the Cyrenian hind, he sought advice from the centaur Chiron. For the Cretan bull, he accepted help from the locals. Even the mightiest hero couldn't do everything solo. That's the final piece of the resilience puzzle, knowing when to lean on others. Today's leaders often burn out trying to be the hero of every story. But Hercules reminds us that asking for help isn't weakness, it's how you last long enough to finish the race. So what's the takeaway? Resilience isn't just enduring hardship, it's learning from it. Every labor Hercules faced was a metaphor for a leadership challenge we still wrestle with today. The Hydra teaches adaptability, the stables teach innovation, and the journey itself teaches humility. And here's the kicker: none of his labors were random. They were assigned by a king hoping to break him. But Hercules didn't just survive the trials, he used them to forge unshakable strength. That's the real power of resilience. It's not about avoiding adversity, it's about letting it transform you. Theseus faced more than just a monster in the heart of the labyrinth. He faced the ultimate test of decision-making under pressure. Picture standing in a twisting, turning maze with no map, no exit, and a bloodthirsty beast lurking somewhere in the shadows. Most would panic, but Theseus did something extraordinary. He trusted both his instincts and his preparation. That's the hidden genius of this myth. It's not just about courage, it's about how to navigate uncertainty when every choice could be your last. The thread of Ariadne wasn't just a clever tool, it was a lifeline of strategic foresight. Before even stepping into the labyrinth, Theseus secured a way to retrace his steps. Modern leaders call this exit strategy or fail-safe, but the principle is timeless. Never dive into chaos without a plan to find your way back. Think of a CEO navigating a corporate crisis or a surgeon making split-second decisions in the operating room. The best don't just rely on quick thinking, they prepare for the unknown. Ariadne's thread symbolizes the value of foresight, tying a mental knot before the storm hits so you can navigate your way out when everything goes dark. But preparation alone wasn't enough. Theseus also had to adapt on the fly. The labyrinth wasn't static. It was designed to disorient, to shift perceptions, to make even the most confident leader second-guess themselves. Sound familiar? Today's labyrinths are boardrooms, markets, or political arenas, environments where information is incomplete, stakes are high, and pressure distorts judgment. Theseus teaches us that in these moments, intuition isn't the opposite of logic, it's the partner. When data is scarce, leaders must blend analysis with gut instinct, just as Theseus listened for the Minotaur's breath while following the thread's guidance. Here's the twist: the Minotaur wasn't the real enemy. The true adversary was the maze itself, the paralyzing complexity that makes fear louder than reason. Modern leaders face the same battle. A crisis isn't just the problem at hand, it's the noise, the distractions, the voices demanding instant solutions. Theseus' victory came from quieting that chaos. He moved deliberately, not recklessly. He used his resources wisely, not wastefully, and when the moment came, he acted decisively. That's the blueprint: prepare, adapt, then strike. So what's the takeaway for today's leaders? The labyrinth is everywhere. Whether you're steering a team through a project gone wrong or making life or death decisions in an emergency, the myth whispers two truths. First, preparation gives you the thread, the systems, the mentors, the contingency plans. Second, intuition becomes your compass when the path ahead is blurred. Together, they turn the maze from a trap into a test you're equipped to pass, because the Minotaur isn't waiting for the unprepared. It's waiting for those who think they can wing it. Perseus faced a problem no warrior could solve with brute force. How do you defeat an enemy you can't even look at? Medusa's gaze turned men to stone, making direct confrontation suicide. But where others saw impossibility, Perseus saw an opening. His solution wasn't just clever, it revolutionized the very idea of strategy. By polishing his shield into a mirror, he turned Medusa's greatest strength into her fatal weakness. This wasn't just a mythic battle, it was a masterclass in lateral thinking, proving that sometimes the most powerful moves aren't forward thrusts but sideways glances. Modern leaders call this disruptive innovation, but the principle is ancient. When you can't overpower a dominant opponent, outthink them. Think of how streaming services didn't try to build better video stores, they made the stores irrelevant. Or how guerrilla fighters avoid head-on clashes with armies, striking where defenses are weakest instead. Perseus' shield teaches us that power isn't always about having the sharpest sword. It's about seeing the battlefield differently. Here's what most miss about this myth: Perseus didn't act alone. The gods equipped him with tools tailored to his mission: winged sandals for mobility, a helm of invisibility for stealth, and that fateful mirrored shield. This wasn't luck, it was strategic resource allocation. Today's leaders face similar choices. Do you pour all your resources into one frontal assault, or do you distribute them for maximum flexibility? Perseus shows us that victory often goes to those who leverage every asset creatively, not just aggressively. And let's talk about timing. Perseus didn't rush into battle. He waited until Medusa was isolated, striking when she was most vulnerable. There's a reason startups avoid challenging giants head-on. They wait for market shifts, technological gaps, or cultural fatigue to create openings. The lesson: even the fiercest opponents have moments of exposure. The key is recognizing them before others do. But the deepest wisdom here isn't about defeating monsters, it's about self-awareness. Perseus couldn't rely on his instincts in that fight. One reflexive glance at Medusa, and he'd have been another statue. His survival depended on disciplined focus, on trusting indirect perception over direct confrontation. How often do leaders fail because they trust their gut when data contradicts it, or because they can't resist the urge to meet force with force? The myth whispers a warning. Sometimes the greatest risk isn't your enemy's strength, it's your own reflexes. So what's the takeaway for today's strategists? When facing impossible odds, ask not how to fight harder, but how to fight smarter. Whether you're up against a market leader, a bureaucratic hurdle, or a personal plateau, remember Perseus. The path to victory isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it's a reflection. Jason's greatest challenge wasn't finding the golden fleece. It was convincing 50 of Greece's mightiest heroes to row in the same direction. The Argo wasn't just a ship. It was a floating laboratory of human dynamics where egos clashed as violently as the waves. Hercules' strength meant nothing without Orpheus' diplomacy. Castor's navigation skills were useless unless someone like Atalanta could spot threats from the crow's nest. This wasn't just a crew, it was a case study in how disparate talents, when properly aligned, can achieve the extraordinary. Modern teams face the same paradox. Individual brilliance doesn't guarantee collective success. Think of a startup where engineers build revolutionary tech, but marketers can't explain it. Or a hospital where surgeons excel, but miscommunication between shifts costs lives. Jason's genius lay in recognizing that the fleece wasn't the real prize, the journey itself was the test. Each storm, each island, each confrontation forced the Argonauts to refine their roles until they moved like a single organism. That's the first lesson. A shared vision isn't about agreeing on everything. It's about trusting each person's piece of the puzzle, even when you can't see the whole picture. Take the Clashing Rocks episode, a narrow strait where massive boulders crushed ships at random. Jason didn't overpower them. He synchronized his crews, rowing to slip through at the exact moment the rocks recoiled. That moment captures the essence of high-functioning teams, precision timing born from relentless practice and mutual reliance. Today's equivalent might be a product launch where engineering, design, and sales teams move in perfect harmony, hitting deadlines not through mandates but through ingrained rhythm. But here's what often gets overlooked: Jason's willingness to cede control. When Orpheus' music soothed quarrels or Medea's cunning outwitted obstacles, Jason didn't insist on being the hero. He created space for others to lead in their domains. Modern leadership gurus call this servant leadership, but the Argonauts lived it. Contrast that with toxic environments where managers hoard decision-making, stifling the very talent they recruited. The myth asks a piercing question: are you building a team of stars or a constellation that outshines them all? Yet the darkest lesson comes from the voyage's end. After securing the fleece, the crew's unity frayed. Without a common enemy or clear goal, petty rivalries resurfaced. It's a warning every leader should heed. Alignment isn't a one-time achievement. It's a continuous process reinforced through new challenges, honest feedback, and rituals that reaffirm purpose. Whether you're steering a corporate division or a community project, remember the Argo's secret. The strongest teams aren't those without conflict. They're the ones who transform friction into forward motion, just as the ship's prow turned resistance into speed. Achilles wasn't just a warrior, he was a cautionary tale wrapped in divine armor. His myth cuts deeper than the story of a single weak spot. It reveals the paradox of invulnerability itself. Picture the mightiest fighter of his age, dipped in the river Styx as a child, made nearly immortal except for that one vulnerable heel. But here's the twist: his downfall wasn't just the arrow that found its mark. It was the illusion of perfection that left him blind to his own humanity. That's the real lesson for leaders today. No matter how strong you are, no matter how many battles you've won, unchecked confidence becomes the crack in your armor. Think of modern executives who have fallen not from lack of skill, but from the belief they were beyond reproach. Enron's collapse, tech giants disrupted by startups, these aren't just business failures. They're Achilles' heel moments where leaders stopped questioning their own assumptions. The myth whispers a hard truth: strength without self-awareness is a ticking clock. That's why today's most effective leaders don't hide their vulnerabilities, they name them. Like a CEO admitting gaps in their knowledge to foster a culture of learning, or a surgeon who standardizes checklists because even experts make mistakes. But there's another layer here. Achilles' heel wasn't just a physical weakness, it was symbolic of the emotional blind spots that come with power. His rage after Patroclus' death, the way it clouded his judgment, made him reckless mirrors how modern leaders can be undone by unchecked emotions. Ever seen a brilliant founder driven out by their own temper, or a politician whose stubbornness turned allies into opponents? The myth warns us, no amount of talent can compensate for the damage done when ego overrides wisdom. Yet the most radical takeaway isn't about avoiding weakness, it's about leveraging it. Leadership coaches now teach what ancient storytellers knew instinctively: admitting flaws builds trust faster than projecting infallibility. Studies show teams follow vulnerable leaders more loyally because they seem human, approachable. It's why hospitals reduced errors when doctors started saying, "I don't know," more often, or why companies with transparent cultures outperform those obsessed with appearances. Achilles' real tragedy wasn't his mortality, it was his refusal to acknowledge it until it was too late. So what's the modern playbook? First, map your blind spots like a general surveys a battlefield. Get feedback, welcome dissent, question your surest bets. Second, recognize that emotional vulnerabilities can be just as dangerous as skill gaps. And third, remember that true strength lies not in being invincible, but in knowing exactly where you're not. Because the arrow that hits you won't be the one you're watching for, it'll come from the angle you swore didn't matter. King Arthur didn't just rule a kingdom, he redefined what leadership could look like. The Round Table wasn't a design choice, it was a revolution. In an era when kings sat on thrones elevated above their subjects, Arthur chose a table where no seat was higher than another. This simple act dismantled the visual hierarchy of power, signaling that every voice, whether from a seasoned knight or a fresh recruit, held equal weight. Today, we'd call this flat organizational structure, but Arthur understood it as something far more profound: the recognition that wisdom isn't tied to title. Consider how modern tech giants operate. Companies like Valve and GitHub have adopted radical transparency, where employees choose projects based on merit, not mandates. Or look at emergency response teams, where a nurse's observation can override a doctor's protocol if it saves lives. These aren't new ideas, they're echoes of Camelot. Arthur's table taught that the best decisions emerge when hierarchy steps aside to let expertise lead. But here's what most retellings miss: the Round Table wasn't about eliminating leadership. It was about redefining it. Arthur still made final calls, but only after synthesizing diverse perspectives. Contrast this with toxic workplaces where meetings are just theaters for the CEO's monologues. The myth reveals a timeless truth. Authority doesn't weaken when shared, it multiplies. Research proves this. Teams with psychological safety, where members speak freely, outperform, command, and control groups by staggering margins. Yet the table's genius lay in its balance. While every knight had a voice, not all advice carried equal weight in every situation. When battling a dragon, Lancelot's combat experience took precedence. When navigating diplomacy, Guinevere's political acumen guided them. This fluid meritocracy mirrors modern, holographic teams where leadership shifts based on context. A junior developer might lead a coding sprint, then defer to a marketer during a product launch. Like Arthur's knights, they understand that true equality isn't about sameness, it's about valuing the right expertise at the right time. The darkest lesson, though, lies in the myth's end. Camelot fell not because the Round Table failed, but because its principles were abandoned. When Arthur prioritized loyalty over merit, ignoring warnings about Mordred, the system cracked. It's a warning for today's leaders. Inclusivity without accountability becomes an echo chamber. Whether you're running a startup or a non-profit, remember that symbols like the Round Table aren't magic. They're tools powerful only when backed by the courage to hear uncomfortable truths. So what's the takeaway? Leadership isn't about chairs or titles. It's about creating spaces where the best ideas rise, regardless of where they come from. Arthur's table whispers across centuries. The strongest kingdoms aren't built by solitary rulers, but by those wise enough to know they don't hold all the answers. Beowulf didn't slay monsters just to prove his strength. He did it because no one else would. When Grendel terrorized Heorot, it wasn't ambition that drove Beowulf across the sea, it was responsibility. That distinction separates a true leader from a mere warrior. The myth hides a profound question in its epic battles. What do you do when power isn't just about what you can do, but what you should do? Take the fight with Grendel's mother. Beowulf could have claimed victory after killing the beast and sailed home a hero, but he dove into that murky lake because the job wasn't finished. Evil still lurked beneath the surface. Modern leaders face these same depths daily. Imagine a pharmaceutical CEO who recalls a profitable drug over safety concerns, or a whistleblower risking career ruin to expose corruption. Like Beowulf, they understand that real leadership isn't measured in trophies, but in the burdens you choose to carry. Yet the dragon fight reveals an even sharper truth. By then, Beowulf was an old king, decades removed from his prime. He could have sent younger warriors to face the threat, but when fire scorched his kingdom, he stood on that hill alone because protecting his people wasn't just his duty, it was his identity. That's the essence of servant leadership, power worn lightly like chainmail, not a crown. Today's equivalent might be a founder who steps aside when their company outgrows their skills, or a politician who concedes an election to preserve democracy. These aren't concessions, they're the highest form of strength. What's startling is how the myth foreshadows modern leadership pitfalls. Grendel didn't attack randomly. He targeted Heorot because its king, Hrothgar, had grown complacent in his wealth and fame. Sound familiar? Organizations crumble when leaders confuse success with invincibility. Beowulf's arrival reset the standard. True security comes not from golden halls, but from vigilance and humility. It's why companies with strong ethical frameworks survive scandals while those chasing shortcuts implode. But here's the twist: Beowulf's greatest legacy wasn't his victories. It was his funeral. His people didn't mourn a conqueror, they grieved a protector. That's the ultimate test of ethical leadership, how you're remembered when the battles are over. In an age of quarterly earnings and viral moments, the myth whispers a counterintuitive truth. the leaders we cherish longest aren't those who won the most, but those who gave the most. Because dragons return in endless forms, but the courage to face them never goes out of style. Rama's exile wasn't just banishment, it was the ultimate test of a leader's resolve. Picture this, a crown prince with every right to rule, exiled to the forest for 14 years on the eve of his coronation, all to honor his father's word. Most would rage against the injustice, but Rama's response redefined leadership. He smiled, handed over his royal robes, and walked into the wilderness without looking back. This wasn't resignation, it was mastery. The Ramayana hides a radical lesson in that moment. True power isn't seized, it's surrendered to something greater. Dharma, the cosmic principle of duty, sounds abstract until you see it in action. Rama's choices reveal it as the ultimate leadership compass. When his stepmother demanded his exile, he could have appealed to tradition, to the people's love, even to force. But he recognized a deeper truth. A kingdom's strength flows from its ruler's integrity. Modern leaders face similar crossroads daily: the executive who rejects lucrative but unethical deals, the officer who reports misconduct knowing it might end their career. Like Rama, they understand that short-term wins crumble without long-term principles. Yet the forest exile holds an even sharper insight. Rama didn't just endure hardship, he transformed it. Stripped of his royal status, he forged alliances with marginalized tribes, turning outsiders into loyal allies. Sound familiar? Today's most innovative leaders thrive by engaging voices the system ignores. Think of companies pivoting to remote work, discovering untapped talent pools, or leaders who listen to frontline employees over ivory tower consultants. Rama's exile teaches that adversity isn't just to be weathered. It's an invitation to see beyond conventional hierarchies. Here's where the myth gets uncomfortable. When Ravana kidnapped Sita, Rama's duty as a husband clashed with his duty as a future king. His controversial decision to prioritize her rescue over immediate revenge wasn't weakness, it was strategic patience. Eastern philosophy calls this right action, knowing when to strike and when to prepare. Modern parallels abound: the CEO who delays a product launch to fix flaws, or the diplomat who absorbs insults to secure a greater peace. Rama's restraint whispers a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes leadership means bearing the weight of others' frustration until the moment is ripe. But the real genius of Rama's story lies in its ending. After reclaiming his throne, he didn't reward loyalists or punish detractors. He governed as if the exile never happened. No grudges, no triumphalism. This might be the hardest lesson for today's leaders. Power is most enduring when it's wielded without ego. Whether you're managing a team or a nation, the myth asks one piercing question: can you rule as someone who remembers what it means to lose everything? Because the leaders we remember aren't those who clung to power, they're the ones who proved power was never the point. Sigurd didn't become a legend by slaying the dragon Fafnir, he became one by first recognizing what he didn't know. The sword that cut through scales wasn't forged in isolation, it was shaped by the tutelage of Regin, the blacksmith sage who saw potential where others saw recklessness. This Norse myth isn't just about a hero's triumph, it's a masterclass in the humility of leadership, because the greatest challenge Sigurd faced wasn't the dragon's fire, it was the realization that even the bravest warrior needs a guide. Regin's role went far beyond teaching swordplay. He decoded the dragon's habits, revealing Fafnir's blind spots, how the creature's arrogance made him predictable, how his greed left him vulnerable. Modern leaders call this competitive intelligence, but the principle is ancient. No one conquers uncharted territory alone. Think of Steve Jobs learning calligraphy before designing Apple's fonts, or a young scientist standing on the shoulders of prior research. Sigurd's victory proves that mentorship isn't about dependency, it's about accelerating insight. A single conversation with someone who's walked the path can save years of trial and error. Yet the myth holds a darker truth. Regin wasn't purely selfless, he had his own agenda, urging Sigurd to kill Fafnir to reclaim stolen gold. This twist mirrors the complexity of real-world mentorship. Not all advice is impartial. Some mentors project their unfulfilled ambitions onto their protege gaze. The lesson, wisdom isn't about blind obedience, it's about discernment. Sigurd listened to Regin's knowledge but ultimately trusted his own judgment, especially when he discovered Regin's plan to betray him. Modern leaders face similar tests: when to heed seasoned advisors and when to question their motives. The best proteges, like Sigurd, learn to separate timeless principles from personal biases. What's often overlooked is how Sigurd honored Regin's teachings even after their relationship fractured. After defeating Fafnir, he used the dragon's blood to understand the language of birds, gaining unforeseen wisdom from an unexpected source. That's the final layer of mentorship, staying open to lessons everywhere, not just from designated teachers. Today's equivalent might be a founder who learns as much from customer complaints as from executive coaches, or a doctor who adapts treatments based on nurses' frontline observations. Leadership isn't about outgrowing guidance, it's about recognizing it in ever-evolving forms. So what's the takeaway? The dragon was never the real test. Sigurd's journey whispers that the mark of a transformative leader isn't just strength, it's the wisdom to seek help, the discernment to filter advice, and the humility to keep learning long after the battle ends. Because the deepest treasures aren't the gold under the dragon's belly, they're the insights gifted by those who have walked the path before you. Gilgamesh didn't just lose a friend when Enkidu died, he lost his reflection. The mighty king of Uruk, who once ruled through fear and force, suddenly faced a truth no amount of power could suppress: mortality. This wasn't just grief, it was the catalyst for one of history's greatest leadership transformations. The Epic of Gilgamesh hides a piercing insight in its ancient verses: tyrants build monuments, but true leaders build legacies that outlast them. At first, Gilgamesh's reaction to loss was human, not heroic. He roamed the wilderness in animal skins, consumed by the realization that even kings must one day turn to dust. Modern leaders might recognize this as the success trap, the moment when achievement feels hollow without meaning. Think of a CEO who scaled a company but neglected relationships, or a politician who wins elections but burns every bridge. Gilgamesh's despair mirrors their crisis. What good is power if it leaves no lasting imprint? But here's where the myth pivots from warning to wisdom. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality wasn't just futile, it was misguided. The gods didn't offer him eternal life, they offered something far more potent: the story of the flood. In that tale, Utnapishtim survives not by evading death, but by preserving life. That's the first lesson for modern leaders. Legacy isn't about defying limits, it's about working within them to create something that endures. Today's equivalent might be a founder who shifts from chasing quarterly profits to mentoring the next generation, or a scientist who prioritizes open-source research over personal patents. Like Gilgamesh returning to Uruk, they realize impact isn't measured in years lived, but in lives touched. Research confirms this: companies focusing on long-term value outperform those obsessed with short-term gains, just as leaders who prioritize mentorship retain talent at higher rates. Yet the most radical shift was in Gilgamesh's leadership style. Pre-Enkidu, he ruled by decree. Post-Enkidu, he ruled by understanding. The walls of Uruk became more than fortifications, they became symbols of collective security, built not for his glory but for his people's future. Modern parallels abound. Think of nations transitioning from autocracy to participatory governance, or corporations replacing top-down mandates with employee-led innovation. The myth whispers that sustainable leadership isn't about control, it's about creating systems that thrive beyond your presence. And here's the twist most miss. Gilgamesh never found eternal life, but he achieved something rarer. 3,000 years later, we're still discussing his journey. That's the ultimate leadership paradox. The more you chase immortality, the faster it eludes you. But invest in empathy, wisdom, and structures that elevate others. That's how you carve your name into history, because the walls of Uruk didn't make Gilgamesh immortal. The story did. Mulan didn't wait for permission to become a leader. She rewrote the rules in the middle of the battlefield. While ancient China measured worth by lineage and gender, her story flips the script. True leadership isn't about who you're supposed to be, but what you're willing to do. Disguising herself as a man to spare her aging father from war wasn't just an act of love, it was a masterstroke of disruptive strategy. Because here's what most retellings gloss over: Mulan didn't just survive the army, she thrived by leveraging skills no one thought to look for. Her keen observational skills, honed from years outside the rigid training given to sons, became her secret weapon. While others relied on brute strength, she noticed terrain advantages, predicted enemy movements, and turned perceived weaknesses into tactical strength. This myth mirrors today's most groundbreaking leaders, those who challenge outdated systems not by shouting louder, but by operating differently. Think of the introverted CEO who replaces aggressive meetings with written decision memos, or the neurodiverse engineer whose atypical thinking solves problems linear minds miss. Like Mulan, they prove innovation often comes from the margins, not the center. Studies back this up. Companies with diverse leadership teams report 19% higher innovation revenues. Why? Because homogeneity breeds predictability while difference sparks adaptation. Yet Mulan's real lesson isn't just about diversity, it's about timing. She didn't protest the system from the outside, she infiltrated it, excelling within its constraints until her results became undeniable. Modern parallels abound. The female director who outperforms male peers in a sexist industry, or the minority founder who builds a unicorn startup despite biased investors. Their playbook is pure Mulan: master the game, then change it from within. But here's the twist often overlooked: Mulan's greatest leadership moment came after her disguise was revealed. When her identity was exposed, she didn't apologize or step back. She stood her ground, letting her battlefield achievements speak louder than tradition. That's the ultimate disruptive move, forcing systems to reconcile their biases with undeniable results. Today's equivalent might be a transgender officer earning promotion despite prejudice, or a wheelchair-using architect redesigning inaccessible spaces. Like Mulan, they redefine leadership not by demanding acceptance, but by making exclusion impossible to justify. The myth's ending holds the sharpest insight. Mulan refused the emperor's offer to become a high-ranking official, choosing instead to return home. This wasn't resignation, it was a quiet revolution. By walking away from conventional power, she proved that leadership isn't about titles or thrones, it's about agency. Whether you're challenging corporate hierarchies or cultural norms, the story whispers a radical truth. Sometimes the most powerful way to change the system is to show you don't need its permission to lead. Cu Chulain's greatest strength was also his curse. The more fiercely he fought, the less human he became. Irish legends describe his warp spasm, a terrifying transformation where his body would twist inhumanly, muscles contorting, eyes bulging, becoming an unstoppable force on the battlefield. But this wasn't just a superpower, it was a warning. Leaders today face their own version of warp spasm. the relentless drive to push harder, faster, longer, mistaking exhaustion for excellence. The myth asks a piercing question: what good is winning every battle if you lose yourself in the process? Modern hustle culture glorifies this unsustainable intensity. All-nighters worn like badges of honor, inboxes emptied at the cost of health, teams pushed to breaking points in the name of growth. Ku Chulain's story reveals the irony. His frenzy made him invincible in single combat, but it also left him unable to distinguish friend from foe. Sound familiar? Ever seen a leader so fixated on targets they burn out their best people? Or a founder whose obsessive drive alienates everyone who once believed in them? The warp spasm isn't just an ancient legend, it's playing out in corner offices and startups right now. But here's what most retellings miss: Ku Chulain's tragedy wasn't inevitable. The myth hints at alternatives. His mentor, Scathach, taught him combat skills but also warned against over-reliance on raw fury. And in quieter moments, he showed tenderness, his grief for fallen comrades, his loyalty to allies. These glimpses reveal the balancing act leaders must master, channeling passion without being consumed by it. Today's equivalent might be the CEO who schedules thinking time amid back-to-back meetings, or the surgeon who insists on breaks during marathon operations. They understand what Ku Chulain learned too late: true endurance isn't about ignoring limits, it's about respecting them strategically. The darkest lesson comes from the hero's end. In his final battle, wounded and exhausted, Ku Chulain tied himself to a standing stone so he could keep fighting even as death took him. It's a haunting image, the ultimate symbol of dedication twisted into self-destruction. Modern workplaces are littered with similar casualties: the executive who collapses from stress, the artist whose brilliance fades under burnout, the activist whose fire dims from constant strain. The myth whispers that unsustainable intensity isn't heroism, it's a ticking clock. So what's the alternative? Look to Ku Chulain's overlooked moments, his training under Scathach, his bonds with allies, the times he chose restraint over rage. These weren't weaknesses, they were the counterbalance to the warp spasm. Today's most effective leaders mirror this duality. They pair intensity with recovery, drive with reflection. Like athletes who alternate sprints with rest, they recognize that passion must be renewable to endure, because the greatest battles aren't won in a single frenzy. They're won by those who can keep returning to the fight, day after day, without losing who they are. Sun Wukong didn't just rebel against heaven, he outsmarted it. The Monkey King's story in Journey to the West isn't about overthrowing gods with raw power. It's about using wit to turn their own systems against them. When celestial armies descended to punish his defiance, he didn't meet them head-on. He shrank to the size of a beetle to infiltrate their ranks, multiplied into an army of clones to overwhelm them, and even tricked immortals into handing over their treasures. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy disguised as mischief, and hidden in these antics is a masterclass for modern leaders. In a world where rules are rigid and giants loom large, agility isn't just an advantage, it's survival. Take Wukong's signature weapon, the Rui Jingu Bang. A staff that could shrink to needle size or stretch across the heavens wasn't just a magical tool, it was a metaphor for adaptability. Modern disruptors wield similar flexibility. Think of startups that pivot overnight when markets shift, or engineers who repurpose existing tech for radical innovations. Like Wukong's staff, their strength lies not in fixed form, but in the ability to transform as needed. The lesson: brute force scales poorly, ingenuity scales infinitely. But here's what most overlook: Wukong's rebellion had limits. After proving his point, he submitted to Guanyan's guidance, channeling his chaos into a greater mission protecting the monk Tripitaka. This pivot holds a vital insight for leaders. Rebellion without purpose is just noise. Today's equivalent might be a founder who shifts from disrupting an industry to collaborating with regulators, or an activist who transitions from protest to policy. Wukong's journey teaches that the fiercest minds don't just break systems, they learn when to redirect their energy toward building something lasting. Yet the myth's deepest wisdom lies in Wukong's flaws. His arrogance often backfired, like when he boasted his way into Buddha's palm, only to be trapped under a mountain for 5 centuries. Modern leaders face similar traps: visionaries who ignore market realities, or innovators so convinced of their genius they dismiss feedback. The Monkey King's punishment wasn't just karma, it was a forced lesson in humility. His later triumphs came not from defiance alone, but from balancing cleverness with cooperation. So what's the takeaway? Industries today are as unpredictable as the heavenly bureaucracies Wukong navigated. Leaders who thrive will share his traits: the cunning to spot loopholes, the flexibility to shift tactics, and the wisdom to know when rebellion must evolve into stewardship. Because the real magic wasn't in Wukong's staff or his clones, it was in his ability to keep rewriting the rules without losing sight of the greater journey. Horus didn't just defeat Set, he restored a cosmic balance shattered by jealousy and chaos. Their 80-year battle in Egyptian mythology wasn't merely a clash of gods, it was a blueprint for leadership in the wake of turmoil. Picture a kingdom where brother turns against brother, where storms swallow cities, and the very fabric of order unravels. That's the crisis Horus inherited, one that mirrors modern leadership's toughest tests: corporate coups, political fractures, or communities torn by conflict. What makes this myth timeless isn't the victory itself, but how Horus achieved it, not through annihilation, but through measured justice that healed as much as it punished. The first lesson lies in how Horus prepared. Before facing Set, he sought wisdom from gods and mortals alike, gathering perspectives to understand the conflict's roots. Modern crisis managers call this stakeholder mapping, but the principle is ancient. Solutions imposed from above often fail, while those forged through listening endure. Think of a CEO navigating a merger, spending months aligning teams before integrating systems, or a mayor rebuilding after a disaster, prioritizing community input over top-down mandates. Like Horus consulting Thoth for strategy or Isis for counsel, they recognize that authority alone doesn't solve fractures, empathy does. Yet the myth's brilliance shines in the trial of the gods. When Horus and Set presented their cases, the divine tribunal didn't just declare a winner, they crafted reparations. Set was forced to sail the sun boat, contributing to the order he disrupted. This nuance separates revenge from resolution. Today's parallels abound: restorative justice programs that focus on accountability over punishment, or companies that reintegrate reformed whistleblowers into oversight roles. Horus' victory teaches that true stability isn't about silencing dissent, it's about transforming chaos into contribution. But here's what most overlook: Horus' lasting impact came after the battle. As ruler, he didn't erase Set's legacy, he contained it. Egyptian cosmology still honored Set's role in testing boundaries, just confined to deserts where his storms wouldn't harm the fertile Nile. Modern leaders can learn from this containment strategy. Consider how tech platforms quarantine harmful content without banning free expression, or how democracies balance protest rights with public safety. The myth whispers that order isn't the absence of conflict, it's the art of channeling disruptive forces where they can't destabilize the whole. The deepest insight emerges from Horus' wounds. He lost an eye in battle, a sacrifice later transformed into the all-seeing Ajat, symbol of protection. This metamorphosis holds a radical truth: leaders who have endured crises often become their culture's greatest safeguards. Like a founder who survives a scandal to build ethical guardrails, or a nation that emerges from civil war with robust reconciliation frameworks, the healed wound becomes wisdom. Horus' story reminds us that restoration isn't about returning to what was, it's about creating something stronger from what remains. Vainamarinen's voice carried more power than any sword in Finnish legend. When an arrogant youth named Joukahainen challenged him to a duel, the ancient sage didn't reach for a weapon, he reached for a song. What unfolded wasn't a clash of steel, but a battle of wits and words so potent it sank Joukahainen into a bog. This myth isn't just folklore, it's a masterclass in the art of persuasion, proving that the right words wielded with precision can dismantle aggression without a single blow. Consider how modern leaders navigate high-stakes conflicts. A skilled negotiator doesn't overpower opponents, they reframe the conversation. Think of diplomats who avert wars through backchannel dialogue, or CEOs who transform hostile takeovers into mergers by addressing unspoken fears. Vainamarinen's strategy mirrors this. He didn't deny Joukahainen's challenge. He elevated it into a contest of wisdom, exposing the youth's ignorance through riddles and poetry. The lesson: force breeds resistance, but persuasion disarms. Studies show that teams led by empathetic communicators outperform authoritarian ones by up to 50%. Why? Because coercion wins compliance, while inspiration wins commitment. Yet Vainamarinen's true brilliance lay in his preparation. Before the duel, he spent decades honing his knowledge, learning the origins of fire, the language of animals, the secrets of the natural world. This wasn't just accumulation, it was strategic arsenal building. Modern negotiators operate similarly. The executive who masters industry trends, cultural nuances, and psychological triggers isn't just informed, they're equipped to pivot any discussion. Like Vainamarinen singing a bridge into existence to escape peril, they adapt by drawing from deep reservoirs of insight. But here's the twist: persuasion isn't about manipulation. When Vainamarinen later needed a boat, he didn't trick a craftsman into building it, he moved him with a heartfelt song about loneliness and the sea. That's the ethical core of soft power. Today's equivalence might be a leader who shares vulnerable stories to unite a divided team, or an activist whose personal narrative shifts public opinion. Data confirms this. Authenticity increases influence effectiveness by up to 63%. The myth reminds us that the most compelling arguments speak to shared humanity, not just self-interest. The darkest lesson comes from Vainamarinen's failures. When he tried to force a maiden to marry him with magic, his spells backfired spectacularly. Even the wisest leaders stumble when persuasion becomes demand. It's a warning echoed in modern missteps: the manager who relies too heavily on charisma without substance, or the politician whose rhetoric rings hollow without action. True influence, like Vainamarinen's songs, must resonate truth to endure. So what's the takeaway? In an era of noise and confrontation, the quiet power of persuasion cuts through. Whether you're navigating a salary discussion, rallying a community, or diffusing a conflict, remember the old sage secret: the right words sung at the right time can move mountains, or at the very least stubborn opponents. Because the battles we fight today may not be with swords, but with something far more enduring: ideas. And those are won not by force, but by the irresistible pull of wisdom wrapped in melody. Rostam didn't recognize his own son in the heat of battle, and that moment of tragic misjudgment cost him everything. The Shawneme's heartbreaking tale of Rostam and Sohrab isn't just a story of mistaken identity. It's a searing lesson in how assumptions, left unchecked, can unravel even the mightiest leaders. Picture this: a legendary warrior revered across Persia, facing a young challenger whose skill matches his own. Rostam sees only an opponent, not the son he's never met. When the fatal blow lands and he discovers the truth too late, the grief isn't just personal, it's a leadership failure etched in blood. The myth exposes a flaw far more dangerous than any battlefield weakness, the arrogance of certainty. Rostam never paused to ask who this gifted young fighter might be. He never considered that his own legacy could stand across from him, disguised as an enemy. Modern leaders face similar blind spots daily. The executive who dismisses a junior employee's idea without hearing it out, only to see a competitor profit from it months later, or the politician who brands protesters as troublemakers without listening to their legitimate grievances. Rostam's tragedy teaches that assumptions aren't just mental shortcuts, they're landmines waiting to detonate. Yet the deeper failure was one of humility. Even after wounding Sohrab, Rostam brushed aside the youth's desperate claims of kinship, convinced it was a trick. That moment captures a chilling truth. When we're too invested in being right, we become incapable of recognizing truth. Studies show this phenomenon in boardrooms and governments' decision-makers who ignore contradictory evidence because it challenges their worldview, doubling down on flawed strategies rather than admitting oversight. Rostam's fatal flaw wasn't his strength, it was his unwillingness to entertain the possibility he might be wrong. But here's what most retellings miss: the Shahnameh offers a counterpoint in Sohrab himself. The young warrior carried his father's emblem, hoping Rostam would recognize him. This detail holds a profound leadership insight. Truth often leaves clues for those willing to look. Modern equivalents abound: the customer complaints that hint at systemic issues, the employee surveys revealing cultural cracks, the market shifts signaling disruption. Like Sohrab's emblem, these signals are visible, but only to leaders humble enough to seek them. The myth's ending twists the knife. Rostam's grief doesn't undo his mistake. It merely underscores its permanence. In an era where leaders can delete tweets or walk back statements, the story forces a confronting question: what irreversible damage might our unchecked assumptions cause? Whether you're negotiating a deal, evaluating competition, or mentoring a team, Rostam's lesson echoes across centuries. Certainty without curiosity isn't confidence. It's catastrophe waiting to happen, because the highest cost of leadership isn't just being wrong, it's discovering too late that you never stopped to question yourself. Orpheus didn't conquer the underworld with weapons or threats. He walked through its gates armed only with a lyre and a song. While warriors before him had tried to storm Hades with brute force, Orpheus understood something they didn't. True influence doesn't come from overpowering others, it comes from resonating with them. His descent to retrieve Eurydice wasn't just a love story. It was a masterclass in emotional intelligence, proving that even the most unyielding gates swing open for those who know how to speak to the heart. Think of the moment he stood before Hades and Persephone, strumming a melody so piercing it made the god of the dead weep. This wasn't mere entertainment, it was strategic empathy. Orpheus didn't demand or negotiate, he connected. Modern leaders face similar thresholds daily: the boardroom resistant to change, the team paralyzed by fear, the community skeptical of reform. Like Orpheus, the ones who succeed aren't always the loudest or most authoritative. They're the ones who articulate shared longings in a language others feel. Studies back this up. Leaders who score high in emotional intelligence are 75% more effective at driving transformation. Why? Because logic makes people think, but emotion makes them act. Yet the myth holds a darker, often overlooked lesson. Orpheus' fatal mistake wasn't losing faith in his music. It was turning back too soon, doubting the very power that had brought him that far. How many modern leaders sabotage themselves the same way? the executive who rallies a team with vision but micromanages the execution, or the activist who inspires a movement then undermines it with impatience. Orpheus' failure whispers a warning. Influence isn't just about stirring hearts, it's about trusting the process you've set in motion. But here's the twist: even in failure, Orpheus' legacy endured. His songs outlived him, shaping cultures long after his death. That's the untold power of emotional influence. It ripples beyond the moment. Today's equivalents might be a leader whose mantra becomes company culture years after they've left, or an artist whose work sparks movements decades later. Like Orpheus' lyre echoing through time, their impact isn't measured in immediate victories, but in lasting resonance. So what's the takeaway for today's leaders? The underworlds we face: stubborn hierarchies, entrenched biases, seemingly immovable obstacles aren't always stormed by force. Sometimes they're disarmed by those who understand the unspoken fears and hopes humming beneath the surface. Because the most formidable barriers aren't made of stone, they're made of people. And people, as Orpheus proved, will always lean into the song that makes them feel understood. Icarus didn't fall because he dreamed of flying. He fell because he forgot the wax holding his wings together had limits. The myth isn't a warning against ambition. It's a masterclass in understanding the difference between vision and recklessness. Picture the moment when Daedalus, the brilliant craftsman, fastened those wings to his son's shoulders. His instructions weren't just about technique, they were about discipline. Fly too low and the sea's moisture would weigh you down. Fly too high and the sun's heat would melt your wings. The sweet spot, that narrow band where aspiration meets restraint. Modern leaders face the same razor's edge every day: how to push boundaries without burning out teams, how to innovate without ignoring operational realities. Take the startup founder racing to scale before perfecting their product. Like Icarus, they're intoxicated by the altitude, mistaking rapid growth for lasting success. But seasoned entrepreneurs know what Daedalus understood. Sustainable flight requires constant calibration. Amazon's early years reveal this wisdom. Jeff Bezos famously prioritized long-term stability over short-term spikes, even as competitors chased quick wins. The myth whispers that true innovation isn't about how high you can go, it's about how long you can stay aloft. Yet the most overlooked character in this story isn't Icarus, it's Daedalus himself. The father didn't just build wings, he'd already proven his strategic patience when trapped in the labyrinth. Instead of trying to overpower its walls, he engineered an escape by studying their design. That's the first lesson for leaders. Constraints aren't enemies, they're creative catalysts. Modern parallels abound. Elon Musk's SpaceX embraced the physics-first approach, acknowledging material limits while revolutionizing space travel. Like Daedalus, they show that breakthrough thinking starts by respecting boundaries, not denying them. Here's where the myth takes a darker turn. Icarus' fatal flaw wasn't ignorance, it was overconfidence. He'd seen the wings work, felt their power, and in that certainty, he dismissed the warnings. Behavioral economists call this the over-optimism bias, and it's wreaked havoc from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Consider WeWork's collapse, a company so convinced of its invincibility it ignored basic financial realities. Icarus' spiral mirrors every leader who's ever said, "This time is different," right before the crash. But the story's real genius lies in its duality. Daedalus didn't ground his son, he gave him flight, just with guardrails. That's the model for today's best leaders, setting audacious goals while installing checks and balances. Think of Netflix's culture of freedom and responsibility, where radical autonomy operates within clear strategic frameworks, or NASA, rigorous protocols that empower astronauts while prioritizing safety. The myth isn't about clipping wings, it's about wax that flexes but doesn't fail. So what's the takeaway? Ambition without awareness is just gravity waiting to happen. Whether you're launching a product, leading a team, or pioneering change, remember, the sun isn't your enemy. The real danger is forgetting you're flying at all. Because the fall never comes from aiming high, it comes from refusing to look down. Osiris didn't just return from the dead, he transformed what death even meant. The Egyptian gods' dismemberment and resurrection wasn't merely a tale of divine magic. It was a blueprint for leaders who understand that true reinvention isn't about preserving the past, but about reassembling it into something new. Picture this, a ruler so vital to his kingdom that even in pieces, his legacy couldn't be erased. His wife Isis gathered his scattered fragments, not to restore him exactly as he was, but to reanimate him as lord of the underworld, a god reborn with a transformed purpose. That's the hidden lesson for modern leaders. Organizational renewal isn't about patching cracks. It's about reimagining the very foundation. Consider how thriving companies navigate existential threats. When Netflix shifted from DVDs to streaming, it didn't just upgrade its service, it fundamentally redesigned its identity. Like Isis weaving Osiris fragments into a new form, Reed Hastings dismantled the old model to build something that could thrive in a changed world. This myth reveals the uncomfortable truth most leaders avoid. Sometimes survival requires letting go of what once made you successful. The pharaohs understood this intuitively. Their entire civilization was built around cycles of flooding and renewal, death and rebirth. Modern organizations face the same rhythms: market disruptions, technological shifts, cultural transformations, and the leaders who endure are those who, like Osiris, embrace reinvention as a form of continuity. Yet the myth's brilliance lies in what happened next. Osiris didn't return to rule the living, he became sovereign of the afterlife, establishing a system of judgment and eternal order. This pivot holds a radical insight. Transformational leadership isn't just about changing your organization. It's about creating structures that endure beyond your direct involvement. Think of founders like Steve Jobs designing Apple's innovation culture, or educators like Maria Montessori crafting a pedagogical system that outlived her by centuries. Like Osiris, they built frameworks so robust they became self-sustaining, their influence persisting long after their physical presence faded. But here's the twist often overlooked: Osiris' resurrection required collective effort. Isis gathered his body, Anubis embalmed him, Thoth provided the spells. No single actor could have achieved this transformation alone. Modern parallels abound. Satya Nadella didn't revive Microsoft through solo heroics, but by fostering a growth mindset culture where every employee could contribute to renewal. The myth whispers that systemic change isn't dictated from the top, it's co-created at every level. The darkest lesson comes from Set, Osiris' betrayer. His attempt to scatter the gods' pieces mirrors the forces leaders face today: short-term thinkers who disrupt for personal gain, siloed teams that hoard knowledge, systems that resist integration. Osiris' victory wasn't just physical reassembly, it was the triumph of cohesion over fragmentation. Contemporary leaders channel this when they break down internal barriers, like Toyota's Kanban system linking every worker to the production flow, or open-source movements turning individual code into collective innovation. Ultimately, the myth asks a piercing question: are you building a kingdom that collapses without you, or a legacy that adapts and grows? Because the sandstorms of time bury rulers who cling to power, but they polish the monuments of those who, like Osiris, understood that true leadership is measured not in years of rule, but in systems that outlive them. MacCool didn't carve the giant's causeway with his bare hands, he built it stone by stone, with an entire community's strength behind him. While other myths celebrate lone heroes performing impossible feats, this Irish legend flips the script. The causeway stretching into the sea wasn't the work of one giant's might, but of countless hands working in unison. That's the radical heart of this myth. It's not about how high one person can reach, but about how far a group can go when they move together. Picture the scene: boulders too massive for any single being to lift, yet perfectly aligned across the water because each person took the stone they could carry. Modern leaders might recognize this as the stone soup principle, the idea that collective contribution, no matter how small each part seems, creates something no individual could achieve alone. Think of open-source software projects where thousands of developers contribute snippets of code, resulting in systems like Linux that power 40% of the internet. Or consider how Wikipedia, built by millions of anonymous edits, became the sum of countless small acts of collaboration. MacCool's Causeway teaches the same lesson. Infrastructure, whether physical or social, isn't built by titans. It's built by tribes, yet the myth's brilliance lies in its quiet challenge to conventional leadership. Finn didn't command his community from atop a hill. He worked alongside them, laying stones in the mud just like everyone else. This mirrors today's most effective organizational models: the CEO who spends a day a month answering customer service calls, or the surgeon who scrubs floors to understand hospital workflow bottlenecks. Research confirms this. Companies with leaders who practice floor-level leadership see 30% higher employee engagement. Why? Because people don't just follow authority, they follow those willing to share the weight. But here's the twist most retellings miss. The Causeway wasn't just a practical project, it was a statement. When the Scottish giant Benandana threatened Ireland, Finn's response wasn't to hoard resources or fortify his own position. It was to expand access, creating a bridge that connected rather than divided. Modern leaders face similar moments: the choice between walling off competition or forging alliances that elevate entire industries. Like Apple opening its Swift programming language to developers, or Tesla sharing electric vehicle patents, the boldest moves often involve turning threats into connections. The darkest lesson comes from the myth's climax. When Benandana finally crossed the causeway, Finn's wife Unog didn't resort to force. She outsmarted the giant by disguising Finn as a baby, making Benandana fear the father's even greater size. This wasn't just a clever trick, it was a masterstroke of collaborative strategy. Unog's role reminds us that leadership isn't centralized, it's distributed. Today's equivalents might be the behind-the-scenes teams who amplify their leaders' impact, or the partners whose unseen support makes public victories possible. The myth whispers that true strength isn't just in the hands that lift stones, it's in the relationships that make the lifting meaningful. So what's the modern takeaway? Whether you're scaling a startup or rebuilding a neighborhood, remember Finn's Causeway. The impossible becomes possible not when one person carries the load, but when many share the weight. Because the monuments that last aren't those built by giants, they're built by communities who understood that every stone, no matter how small, changes the landscape. Coyote doesn't just survive chaos, he dances in it. Where other myths feature heroes with unshakable plans, this Native American trickster thrives by turning every stumble into a new step forward. Picture him tumbling down a ravine, only to land on the back of a startled buffalo that carries him faster than he could have run. Or watch as he accidentally sets a prairie fire, then harvests roasted game from the ashes. These aren't just clever tricks, they're masterclasses in adaptive leadership, proving that the most resilient strategies aren't rigid, but responsive. Modern innovators could learn from Coyote's playbook. When SpaceX's early rockets kept exploding, Elon Musk didn't double down on the same designs. He treated each failure as live data. iterating rapidly until those fiery crashes became controlled landings. Like Coyote transforming a fall into a ride, they reframed disaster as feedback. Studies of thriving startups reveal this same pattern. The most successful founders aren't those who avoid mistakes, but those who pivot fastest when things go sideways. Coyote's antics whisper a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes the quickest path forward is a zigzag. Yet Coyote's brilliance isn't just in improvisation, it's in perception. He sees potential where others see dead ends. A dried-up riverbed isn't just an obstacle, it's a hidden highway when the flash floods come. That mindset shift from "this won't work" to "how could this work differently?" separates reactive leaders from adaptive ones. Think of Netflix's pivot from DVD rentals to streaming, or Apple's decision to cannibalize iPod sales with the iPhone. Like Coyote eyeing a cactus not as a barrier but as a water source, they reimagined constraints as launch pads. But here's where the myth gets thorny. Coyote's adaptability has limits. When he tries to steal fire from the gods by pretending to be a harmless old dog, his greed nearly gets him cooked. The lesson: flexibility without purpose is just flailing. Modern parallels abound: companies that chase every trend without a North Star, or politicians who flip-flop until voters distrust every word. Coyote's close call reminds us that adaptation isn't about abandoning principles, it's about finding new ways to uphold them. The darkest twist comes when Coyote gets too clever. In one tale, he tries to fly by tying himself to migrating geese, only to plummet when the ropes fray. It's a warning for leaders today. Not every risk is worth taking. The startups that survived the dot-com crash weren't those chasing every opportunity, but those discerning which leaps had wings. Like Coyote brushing himself off after that fall, resilient leaders know the difference between a pivot and a freefall. Yet the myth's true genius lies in its ending. No matter how spectacularly Coyote fails, he never stops moving. No defeat is final, no lesson unlearnable. That's the ultimate takeaway for leaders navigating today's volatile landscape. When the market shifts or the plan crumbles, remember the trickster's secret. The ground beneath your feet isn't collapsing, it's just reshaping. And if you're light enough on your toes, you'll find the next step before the dust settles. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were survival kits for the soul, passed down through generations because their lessons refused to grow old. What makes these myths so startlingly relevant isn't just their wisdom, but how they deliver it. They don't lecture, they show. Odysseus' quiet patience, Mulan's disruptive ingenuity, Coyote's relentless adaptability. Each tale is a mirror held up to the challenges we face today, proving that leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions of ourselves. Consider how these ancient voices speak to modern crossroads. A founder scaling their startup might hear echoes of Icarus in the rush to expand too quickly. A teacher navigating classroom conflicts could channel Vainamarinen's Art of Persuasion. Even parents might recognize Rostam's tragic assumptions in their own moments of rushed judgment. The genius of these myths lies in their duality. They're both cautionary tales and compasses, warning us of pitfalls while illuminating paths forward. Research from Harvard Business Review confirms this. Leaders who study historical narratives make 23% better decisions under pressure, not because the past repeats itself, but because it rhymes. Yet the most transformative power lies in how these stories reframe failure. Osiris shattered into fragments only to return wiser. MacCool's community turned scattered stones into a causeway. Even Icarus' fatal plunge carries an oft-missed lesson. The same sun that melted his wings also lifted them. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth, the ability to rebuild stronger after collapse. These myths taught it centuries ago, wrapping resilience in metaphor so it could survive the ages. So here's the invitation. Don't just consume these stories, converse with them. Which hero's struggle mirrors your current battle? What mythological flaw might be your blind spot? The comment section isn't just a space for reactions, it's the modern agora where these ancient dialogues continue. Hit subscribe not for more content, but for more keys to the cipher, because the greatest secret these myths hold isn't in their endings, it's in your